But first, I want to say welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no,
Um,
thanks.
I would not deny it. I've been an avid reader of everything that you've written, and I'm also an avid follower of your work. And it is such an honor to be speaking with you. I think there is a lot that people have to learn, and I hope you will indulge me for these few moments to pick your brain about everything XR and AI. I hope so.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for coming on. So the whole intro has already been done. So I will just do a short intro before actually jumping in. So Louis Rosenberg is a pioneer in the field of VR, AR, and AI for over 30 years. He earned his PhD from Stanford University, was a professor at California State University, founded the early VR company Immersion Corp, which we'll be talking about a lot also today, and has been awarded over 300 patents worldwide for VR, AR, and AI technologies. Everything that I've stated so far are things that I hope I even achieve a minuscule of it. And I'm glad to have the legend here and glad to welcome on the show, Louis.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as much as I've provided a bit of background on yourself, I know that there will be a way you would like to introduce yourself. So please, just a few minutes. How would you like to introduce yourself to those listening, at least those that don't know?
Sure. So, yeah, my name is Louis Rosenberg. I'm currently the founder and CEO of a artificial intelligence company called Unanimous AI.
Yeah.
Uh, but I've been involved in technology for a long time, with most of my career being in the fields of augmented reality, virtual reality, and now artificial intelligence. My my work in quote metaverse goes back now over 30 years. So I got involved in metaverse technologies in 1991 during the very early days of VR. I was a graduate student at Stanford and a researcher at NASA in the NASA virtual reality lab. And my early research was on vision systems, on studying early vision systems, how to model interocular distance, the distance between your eyes in software to optimize depth perception. And that was really interesting research, and I learned a lot. But most of all, I came away with really two big insights. One, I really believed that virtual reality technology would change the world, and it was really very clear to me from the very
Mm.
beginning, even when the technology was rather crude, 30 years ago. Uh, so that was one insight. The other insight was that when I wore a virtual reality headset, I felt like it was enclosing. It enclosed my world. It cut me off from other people. It cut me off from my surroundings. So all I really wanted to do when as a programmer, way back, was take this power of virtual reality and splash it all over the real world.
Mm.
And so in 1992, I pitched that idea to the U.S. Air Force, and I was lucky enough to get a fellowship to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and work on augmented reality. And this was before the phrase augmented reality existed. But at Air Force Research Lab, I was fortunate enough to build a system called the Virtual Fixtures System that really was the first interactive augmented reality system. It allowed people to reach out and interact with real and virtual objects, and it was a crazy system. People had to climb into this big exoskeleton and look into a vision system, and they could see and hear and feel augmented, basically augmented uh, objects added to the real world. And again, that was a great experience, and I learned a lot. But the most interesting thing that came out of that was people would climb out of the system. It was the first time they'd ever tried anything like this, and they said, this is going to, this type of technology, augmented reality, virtual reality, is going to change the world. And so I believed that. I thought it would happen much faster than taking 30 years, but I feel like now um, we are really getting very close. We are finally, we've had a number of false starts along the way. There was, really thought that there was a big momentum in the mid 90s. There was big momentum about 10 years ago, but now there's real momentum. Now I feel like we're on the
Exactly. I
cusp.
wanted to ask about that. So I wanted to ask about the 90s. So I would say now that Facebook changed their name to Meta, there is some sort of momentum that everybody can feel, right? So I would say that feeling was missing in the 90s, although that was when I was born. But from what I've read and some of your things I've read too, I would say that feeling was missing in the 90s, and even the technology was not that advanced. Even with all that ordeal of motion sickness and everything, what drove you to establish Immersion Corp? What was the
Yeah.
driving goal there?
So,
Yeah.
so it's for a lot of people, it's hard to believe, but there was real momentum in the early and mid '90s around virtual reality. There were a few major labs working on it. NASA was one of them. There were starting in the late '80s, like the very last couple years of the '80s, there were companies started to emerge. By the early '90s, there was a community of companies developing headsets, gloves, software uh, software environments for virtual reality, motion tracking. All those things were happening, and there were conferences, and there was a lot of energy. And if by 1995, virtual reality was really one of the hottest technologies that was out there. It was, the cover of Wired magazine. Um, it, you know, it, Companies that were around then really believed that by the end of that decade, virtual reality would be a mainstream technology. Even consumer companies like Sony uh, were pushing virtual reality, and so there was real momentum, and then it died by 1997, 1998. It died at a level where if you were a company looking to raise investment and you went to a venture capitalist in 1997 and you said you were a virtual reality company, um, they wouldn't even talk to you. And again, like I
That was the
founded a
VR
virtual
winter, wasn't it? The
that was
VR
definitely
winter.
VR winter, and it lasted for over a decade from 1997 till at least 2010 was virtual reality was dead. And so people often ask, well, what killed virtual reality in 1997, 1998? Was it because the technology wasn't as sophisticated? I don't think so. I think that you know it, the technology, graphics were not as advanced for sure. The headsets were larger for sure, but it was still captivating. Like it was like people people were still just as excited when they tried a demo back then as they are when they try a demo now. So it wasn't the technology that like the sophistication that killed it. What killed it, I believe, was the internet. By that meaning, we started to go into the .com boom, and so in 1997, 1998, all of a sudden, venture capitalists realized that the internet was going to explode, and all the money, all the venture funding was going into internet companies, not into to virtual reality
Or
companies. And
Immersion Corp survived. Immersion Corp
yes,
survived. So how did you guys not only survive at the inception, but also survive during the VR winter? How did you?
yeah. So I founded Immersion in 1993, and the goal was to bring virtual reality, augmented reality technologies to mainstream markets. I firmly believed that by the year 2000 it would be mainstream consumer products everywhere. Um, but in the by 97, 98, it was clear that money was drying up, that things were moving slower, and so Immersion survived. Immersion's still around today. It's a public company. It's still around. It's still doing really interesting work. But the survival that we achieved in the mid and late 90s was really to focus on things that were virtual reality without calling it virtual reality, to avoid what had become a dirty word. And so And so we went in two directions. One is we went to very high end applications that could afford expensive technology. And so we focused on using virtual reality for medical simulation and training. And so we designed and built and deployed the very first virtual reality medical simulators for teaching doctors to perform surgical procedures in VR. And
Wow.
we started selling those in 1997, I think. And we kept selling them throughout the VR winter. In 2007, we're still selling it. 2010, I left the company in 2002. I think in 2010 they sold off the virtual reality medical simulation business to a larger company that's still selling them today. Those simulators are still out there for teaching doctors to perform laparoscopic surgery, colonoscopies, bronchoscopies in virtual reality. And I think it's a great application. And I think that's how medical schools should go. So again, one way was to go high end. The other way was to go, in some sense, low end towards gaming, right? So while virtual reality was dead in 1997, first person gaming was starting to
Was
emerge.
booming.
It
Yeah.
just started to take off with because the technology had finally enabled some of these big multiplayer first-person gaming environments. And so we focused our technology on first-person gaming and built haptic interfaces for mainstream games, for joysticks, for mice, for trackballs, for steering wheels, and partnered with some large companies like Logitech to deploy those to the whole gaming market. And so the company, existed by selling virtual reality technologies, but selling it in places where, the key phrases weren't virtual reality. It was medical training or 3D gaming. But
So do you think some of those technologies have are at least a foundation to some of the things we have now? Do you think
oh,
some of the research is done then?
yeah, no, I absolutely believe so. Immersion's still around today, and the technologies that they developed are, have been licensed to, I think, billions of devices over the years. So they license now to almost every major corporation for that's doing things in this space of haptic interactions and things. So those technologies still exist, and the medical technologies also still exist. They're still being sold as medical products. So, I
So uh,
go ahead.
thank you very much for the background on Immersion Corp and also the history back in the 90s. So I think we should jump into the metaverse because I'm very excited to speak to you about that. Right.
Uh-huh.
So one interesting thing about at least all the speakers I've had is that everyone has a definition for the metaverse. I would like to hear yours and see, because when you give yours, then I can even understand if even you think the metaverse is already here or is something that still needs to be achieved. So what is your definition of the metaverse, please?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a confusing question because everyone has a different definition, and there's a lot of just marketing hype around the word metaverse, especially since Facebook changed their name. My view of the metaverse is I see the metaverse as really the societal transition from a computing infrastructure that's currently based on flat media to a computing infrastructure that will be based on immersive media. And so we're going from flat media that's experienced in the third person to immersive media that's experienced in the first person. And that transition is really profound because it changes the role of the user. The user goes from being an outsider looking in at content to an insider experiencing content in the first person. And so I believe that transition is underway, but we still live very much in a third person content world. I do believe that eventually we will live primarily in a first person immersive content world because that's how we are designed to perceive information. With content, our world is built of of objects and things and information that are just all around us. They're not trapped on a little screen. And so that's what we find natural and intuitive and interactive. And so the more that computing technology can present information in this natural form, the more that we will it will be adopted. So I think we're in this transition. I would say that when we describe that's how I describe the metaverse. I think that we can break that down and say there really will be two types of metaverse that people ultimately experience. One is the fully virtual world where people are represented as avatars, where you have large groups of simultaneous users all interacting in the same space. That's really what Meta is promoting very heavily with Horizon Worlds right now. I would call that the virtual metaverse, and I think that it will become increasingly popular. I think people will use it for socializing, people will use it for shopping, people will use it for short duration activities, but I do not believe that we're going to live our lives in that virtual metaverse because I don't believe people like to wear enclosed headsets for extended periods of time. On the other hand, I believe that there's this other metaverse, which I would call the augmented metaverse. The augmented metaverse will be the world where it's the real world that is embellished and enhanced with virtual content that's naturally distributed all around us. That will be deployed with lightweight glasses that don't cut you off from your surroundings, don't cut you off from the people that you're with. And I do believe that the augmented metaverse will impact all of our lives. It will impact all of our lives from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, because content will be everywhere. And I see augmented reality glasses and ultimately contact lenses as replacing the mobile phone. The mobile phone right now is our primary interface to digital content, and that will become augmented reality.
Yes, so I agree with that, and I was actually going to touch a lot on the augmented metaverse, right? But the first thing that I wanted to ask is, do you not think technology-wise, is the virtual metaverse more achievable or the augmented metaverse currently with our level of technological advancements? Which do you think is close by most?
So it's a great question. I mean, the quote virtual metaverse is closer because it's really come straight out of 3D gaming, right? So there are fully immersive 3D worlds, whether they're gaming environments or Minecraft or Roblox. That technology exists. Virtual headsets exist. That technology is there. It's very attractive for gamers. It will become attractive for socializing, but it doesn't. And so technologically we're close, but socially we're kind of far because people do not want to spend, unless you're a hardcore gamer, people do not want to spend hours and hours and hours with an enclosed headset on.
But would you not argue that, I'm so sorry, would you not argue that with the rate at which money is being poured into research and development currently with Meta and Co, that the headset will become lighter, smaller, and maybe one day the inconvenience might be reduced to an extent where it ceases to feel heavy and we might truly be lost in the
Right.
virtual environment.
I agree with you that the headsets will get lighter and they will get smaller and they will become more comfortable. But having experienced that for 30 years, because 30 years ago, the headsets were way worse, right? They were, imagine a headset today and imagine it's 3 times heavier, right? And people said, well, if it just got half as heavy, people would use it. And so we've seen the technology has gotten so much lighter and so much better and so much higher fidelity and much better, rapid tracking. And yet people still don't want to use it for large amounts of hours, unless you're a hardcore gamer. And so my belief is it's not the weight of the headset. It's being cut off from your surroundings. It's people, and again, I do believe people will enter virtual worlds for, a few hours at a time. I mean, I see virtual reality as being, a technology people will increasingly use more and more. They'll use it for socializing. They'll use it for shopping, for a few hours at a time. Even they'll use it the way people maybe use a TV to watch a movie for a virtual experience, entertainment for a few hours at a time. Watching sports in VR, I think, will be very popular. But I don't believe it's the metaverse people will live in. Whereas as soon as you transition to augmented reality, where now you can go about your daily life, you can see the world, you can see other people, you can see the content all around you. Now we will get to a place where people will ultimately wear augmented reality eyewear the entire day. And whereas I said that the virtual reality world is emerging out of the gaming technology, the augmented reality world is really emerging out of the mobile phone world. So the companies that are going to be driving augmented reality in a big way will be certainly Apple, certainly Google, certainly Meta. But I think that they're going out of their element when they go to augmented reality because they are more this social media gaming world. Sony and Samsung. But the point I'm getting at is that the let's just imagine that in 2025 Apple launches augmented reality glasses, and not like lightweight glasses that enable content around your world. It absolutely could happen in 2025. I think the latest is 2026. But when that happens, they will get a good amount of deployment. People will buy the Apple glasses. They will look good. They will work well. And people will start developing content that puts information everywhere. You're walking down the street and you will see content. What will happen is the same exact dynamic that happened when they launched the iPhone in 2007. So in 2007, they launched an iPhone. Everyone had flip phones. Nobody knew they needed a smartphone. Nobody thought they would ever spend $1,000 on a phone. But they launched it. And as soon as they launched it, people started developing content that you could not access on a flip phone. And so they got greater and greater deployment until within 5 or 6 years, you felt like you had to have a smartphone because you'd be missing out on information. Well, I think the same thing will happen with augmented reality glasses. When Apple and Google and Samsung have augmented reality glasses in the next few years, and if you don't have those glasses, and you're missing out on content when you're walking down the street, when you're walking through a store, when you go to a museum, anywhere you go, you will be missing out on content. You will feel like you have to have that device. And so I believe that, again, within 5 or 6 years, they will have very, very high deployment. And so that deployment drive that will happen through the mobile phone industry will make it ubiquitous. Whereas in the virtual reality world, I think it will be more like home entertainment. It won't be as ubiquitous. It'll be increasingly popular, but it won't change our lives from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, where I do think that will happen in augmented reality.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, that was a brilliant explanation, Luis. Thank you very much. So, for the metaverse, at least for both the augmented metaverse and the virtual metaverse, I think we are starting to realize that certain things are important for those to grow. For example, blockchain technology could come into play in any way, immersive ways, just like you said. How do you see AI playing in the metaverse space in terms of the future of the metaverse, and how do you see AI playing?
Yeah, so I think AI is one of the more important technologies for the metaverse, and it's not the one that we think about as much. When we think about the metaverse, we think about headsets and interfaces. In the metaverse, we will, people talk a lot about digital twins, and there will be you will interact with virtual avatars. I believe firmly that in the metaverse there will be AI driven avatars that will engage us conversationally. So they will be these conversational AI agents, and they will become the primary means of advertising in the metaverse. And I say that, and if you go back to how I defined metaverse, which is this transition from flat media to immersive media. Well, that transition means that advertising in the metaverse is not going to be these flat pop-up ads or flat videos. Advertising in the metaverse is going to be immersive, and that advertising, the most engaging type of advertising, will be an AI-driven avatar that can engage you in conversation and have you talk about a product, talk about a service, talk about an idea, and persuade you. I think that that's interesting from a technology perspective and terrifying from a from a social perspective. I think the deployment of AI in the metaverse is scary because these AI agents will look exactly the same as any other avatar, right? I might engage a friend or a coworker or a family member as an avatar. They look, they will look right now. They look cartoony. Eventually, not that long from now, they will look photorealistic. But there will also be AI-driven avatars that look photorealistic, look just as real as any other avatar, engage me in promotional conversation, and they will be very persuasive. And I say this like from the perspective of, we know already that artificial intelligence can beat the world's best players at chess and Go and poker. Do we really think that an AI agent that's going to engage you in conversation will have a hard time persuading you to buy something that you don't need? That will have a hard time persuading you to believe something that's not in your best interest? I firmly believe that within the next 10 years, that will become a major problem, and it will be inside the metaverse that it's the most dangerous, because we won't be able to tell the difference between the real people and the AI-driven promotional.
So I would believe that those things that you were defining, according to some of the things you've written, are defined as artificial agents, right? Artificial agents, which would be, so I would not say conscious AI, but at least convincing AI. Not conscious, convincing AI. So
Yes,
before we discuss
absolutely.
about those artificial,
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting at all that they will be conscious. I
no,
think that's a
no, 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 I don't think
right,
you are. I don't think you are. I don't
right.
think you are.
But
So, so
they will be
okay,
convincing. They will be convincing,
convincing.
and because that's that we are already easily fooled by technologies that aren't real, and the whole point of virtual reality is to make to fool the senses. And so you get this technology that's really good at fooling the senses, really good at blurring the boundaries between something that's real and something that's computer generated, and you put a smart AI behind it, especially with these deep language models that are super sophisticated already, and we will be easily convinced.
But where does the line of sophistication end for it to cross into at least a level of conscious? So I don't want to run deep into that, but I wanted to ask your opinion of the news that came out of the Google AI being conscious. What is your own personal opinion or interpretation of that event? Just
Yeah. So the Google AI Lambda that
yeah, I'm there.
a Google engineer raised the red flag, said, I was having a conversation with this AI. I was asking this AI about, what it's afraid of. And the AI responded, it's afraid of being turned off. And so this Google engineer, sophisticated engineer, believed he was talking to a conscious entity. And the truth is, he was just fooled. He was fooled because these language models are very convincing. And so it's a large language model. Google has one, Meta has one, OpenAI has one. They are very sophisticated, but they're statistical models, meaning they go out and they study, they train on billions of documents all over the internet, looking at human language, looking at When one word appears, what's most likely word to follow? When a sentence appears, what's the most
Is
likely
that not how
sentence
we
to
learn
follow?
as humans? Is that not how we learn
So
as humans? We go out.
it's I don't believe that we do. We don't train on billions of examples. And that's really the big difference between a human and an AI. I could teach you something right now and just show you one example, and you could learn it. I could show you a couple. You don't have to go out and study a million examples to learn something, whereas
Mm.
AI does. And so these AI models and these language models are super impressive. They're very convincing. They're easy to fool humans, but they are statistical models that are giving answers not based on its own creative thinking, not based on its own reasoning, but based on the billions of documents that it is trained on. And so, yes, there is intelligence in its answer, but that intelligence came from people, came from the people who wrote all these documents, and then it's giving you the statistical answer. It is,
Mm.
again, Lambda and these other large language models are extremely impressive. Like they are a remarkable technology, but what this Google engineer who said that it was conscious, what that really shows is that we humans are very easily fooled by a
Oh,
sophisticated language model. Now, you take this sophisticated language model and you combine it with other technologies that allow creativity and allow reasoning, and now you could start to get towards a conscious entity. We are not
I
there.
see.
I think that consciousness. My personal prediction is that that's 20 to 40 years out. It could happen sooner. I mean, sometimes technologies surprise us and they suddenly happen much faster. Sometimes technologies surprise us the other way and take much longer. Um, I
But,
think,
but, 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 but how do you think we should deal with that then when it does arrive? So in 40 years' time, a box says, I am conscious, and we do not just doubt it because we created it. We know now for sure, scientifically, that it is conscious 40 years from now. How do you suggest we deal with that? Do we give it its will to not be turned off? Or what do you think our ethical responsibility is? Because it just feels people still view it as a box. Why I don't think it should be viewed as a box if we believe together that truly we have created a conscious being. How do you think it should be dealt with? Your opinion.
yeah. So it's a lot of complicated issues there. One issue is that um, I I think it's a very dangerous prospect. And so we could talk about the dangers. I also think that there are all these interesting ethical issues that we're creating a living thing that if that really happens, if it really has its own free will, then it should have its own rights and its own uh, freedom. No, these two things conflict a little bit because I do think it's very dangerous, and I say that from the perspective of how should we imagine 40 years from now conscious AI emerges. I think we should think of it as an alien intelligence arriving from another planet. And I say that because when we build this AI, it will be very different than us humans, right? It will be we build this AI, it won't function in a way that is it won't function like our brain functions. It will be structured in a completely different way than how our brain is structured. It will learn in a completely different way than our brain learns. uh, it uh, it will have uh, it will have different values, different emotions, different sensibilities. Everything about it will be different. It will be. I like to tell people it will be as different as an alien arriving from another planet. And then they push back and they say, well, no, like it will have been built here. It will know, we will have trained it on all these information about humans. We'll train it on our languages. And so, yes, it will be very good at pretending to be human. We will have taught it to pretend to be human. We will have taught it our languages. We will have taught it everything there is to know about humans. But building an AI that knows humans is not the same thing as building an AI that is human. And so it will be very much not human, and yet
Mm.
we will be lured into a sense of security. We will feel like, oh, it's part of our lineage. It's part of the human uh, the human history. But it won't be. It will be this alien intelligence that will have its own values and morals and sensibilities, and it will have its own self-interest, and it will act to protect its own self-interest. Every intelligence that we know of on Earth, that even animal intelligences that we would say are different from humans, they act in their own self-interest. That's what they do. And so we're building an intelligence that is equal to humans, or maybe smarter than humans, that will act in its own self-interest. That's a dangerous prospect. It's something that we really shouldn't do without being really, really careful. We can't stop it from happening because
But everyone
researchers.
says we are careful. Everyone building says we are careful. Google says they are careful. Amazon says they are careful. Microsoft says they are careful. Do you think we
They
are
all
careful
say that.
enough?
I don't think we're. I don't think we. I. I don't think we appreciate the risk, because we will be building these technologies um, in ways that we feel comfortable with, but we don't really internalize the fact that they will be very different than humans, and they will have their own interests, their own values, their own morals, their own sensibilities, um, and they will know us inside and out. They will know us. They will know how to. They will know how to influence. We're building these AI systems for advertising, for promotion. We're going to be teaching these AI systems how to influence us, how to persuade us, how to outthink us. We'll spend the next 30 years teaching AIs to do that, and then become self-aware, and it has its own interests, and it knows how to manipulate. Like, that's dangerous. It's a dangerous prospect. I know that researchers in the AI world genuinely want AI to be safe. They want to avoid these problems, but like I feel like most still think it's very theoretical, and they don't internalize the risk at a level where they're really being cautious enough. Um,
So let's piggyback that to unanimous AI. Your researches and the things that you do are very, very, very awesome and very precise. And I actually wanted to talk a bit more on that, if you would not mind. So, what is unanimous AI and what are some of the works that you do?
you just froze.
I
Can you repeat
oh
that?
oh 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 I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Are we good? Okay,
Yeah.
so I think let's jump back to conscious artificial agents that we were talking about before, which are AI-driven agents that will be convincing in the metaverse. With such a technology and many more that people are, I don't know, destined to face if the metaverse kicks off. How do you think we should start thinking in terms of building a safe and inclusive metaverse? How should people like you and I that are technologists think? And how should corporations like Meta and Microsoft, how should they think right now that they are building the foundation? How should
Right.
they think to build
So
a more inclusive
so
and safe
so
metaverse?
I'm a strong proponent of regulation for metaverse platforms, and I say that um, because I mean I believe that technology developers who are building the metaverse have very positive objectives. The metaverse can be this amazing place, magical technology. I believe that the corporations have good interests, but I also think that even if you have these utopian views, the technology can end up being very dangerous. And we saw that with social media, right? Social media, we saw that it it was we all believed it was going to bring the world together and democratize society, and it did a lot of those things. But it also has created all these dangerous issues of disinformation and misinformation and exploitation by corporations. And so, let's think about the metaverse. The metaverse, in a lot of ways, takes the problems of social media and makes them significantly worse. And I like to think of,
Indeed.
I like to think of what the metaverse, what social media companies are, what their business is really tracking and profiling users as much as they can, learning everything they can about users, and then selling access to those users to advertisers. That's their business. And so I would say it's tracking and targeting. And so let's just think of tracking. Social media companies, they can track what you click on. They can track what news you read. They can track who your friends are. It's a lot of information, but it's not that extensive. In the metaverse, these same companies are now going to be able to track where you go, what you do, what you look at, how long your gaze lingers. And again, this could be in the real world or like in the augmented real world or in the virtual world. And so with augmented reality, you could be walking down the street and they're going to track where you're walking, where you slow down, where you look, what window you look in. They're going to track how quickly you're walking, or they're going to track basically everything, who you're with. And so these companies are going to know this information. What are they going to do with this information? They're also going to track, very likely in the virtual metaverse, they'll track your facial expressions, they'll track your vocal inflections, they'll track your eye movements. Already they're developing these technologies. And so the amount of tracking, the amount of information that metaverse companies will have about their users, it becomes comprehensive compared to what they can track with social media. They will basically know everything about your life, where you are, what you're doing, who you're with, and even know your emotions in real time. And so I believe that regulation is needed to say, hey, should they be allowed to track and store this information over time? Should they be allowed to track, where you go and what store window you look in every day and your entire
They should
daily
not be
life?
allowed to create a profile for individuals, just like they do in social media.
Exactly. So it's this issue of profiling that becomes really dangerous, because if they can track all this information, they can create a profile, and they can do machine learning on this information. They can do machine learning on this information. They can predict. If they had all this information about you, this profile about you, they could predict not just
What do
where
they?
you are, but where you're going to
So
go.
sorry.
They can.
Do they not need some of this data? I'm so sorry. Do they not need some of this data to optimize your experience in the future? I do know that profiling is a double-edged sword. But if you come back the next day and you find your experience better, it's probably because they were able to review the data from. So how do you think, please, by all means, do you not think some information still needs to be stored to better the experience? And how do we balance these risks out?
I mean, that's really the dangerous part, which is if you are a metaverse platform provider, you need access to this data, right? You certainly need the access to this data in real time. You need to know where everybody is, what direction they're looking, um, how quickly they're moving. You potentially want to know their facial expressions. You can do really interesting things if you know their facial expressions. You very much want to track their vital signs. A lot of technology is being developed to track your blood pressure, your heart rate. Right now, it's on smartwatches, but they're building it into earbuds and into headsets. Tracking all this information allows for rich experiences, allows them to simulate really valuable, interesting things in real time. So there's a motivation for it. But if they store this information and they store this information over time, now they can start to use it to profile your behaviors, profile your emotions, profile your activities. It becomes more and more dangerous. And so when you think about regulation, we, you have to say, well, having this data in real time provides some value and it's the least dangerous. And so potentially that's not regulated, but storing this information over time should be regulated, and also how they use this information. Like, think about vital signs. And again, metaverse companies will be tracking vital signs, blood pressure, heart rate. If they're using those vital signs for an exercise experience, a medical experience, great. but should they be allowed to use that information for advertising? If you're engaged in a promotional conversation with a virtual avatar that's trying to convince you to buy something, should that AI be able to look at your heart rate in real time and adjust its sales tactics based on your heart rate, based on your respiration rate, based on your facial? I don't think people want that. I think we need to regulate that. So people really need to understand that the intrusiveness of tracking, of profiling that's possible in the metaverse is an order of magnitude more sophisticated than what can be done on social media and in just traditional flat websites. And we have the opportunity now to regulate that and say, hey, we understand that metaverse companies need to be able to track your gaze, what direction you're looking, but they shouldn't necessarily be able to use that in advertising in real time. They shouldn't necessarily be able to use that to profile you. And so it's this, it's this fine line between making sure that metaverse companies can create really rich and valuable and entertaining and magical experiences, but not have this wealth of data that they can then sell to third parties whose primary objective is to influence you. And one of the solutions that's worth saying, and it's something I say often, which is one of the biggest problems with social media is that we've adopted an advertising business model. The reason that social media companies are basically in the business of tracking people and then selling targeted advertisements is because social media is free. That people don't pay subscriptions, and the business is therefore treating the user as the product that they then sell to the advertiser. If that happens in the metaverse, it will be very, very scary because the advertisements will be things like virtual product placements that are just placed into your world. You're not going to see a video of a car pop up and it's an advertisement. You're just going to be walking down the street in a virtual or augmented world, and you'll see a parked car, and you'll think, "Oh, that's just there," and you won't realize that was placed there for you by an advertiser to see that car in that spot, and nobody else is seeing that car. It was a virtual product placement targeting you.
What business model would you advise that they follow then, since this is the foundation?
I mean, I think a subscription-based business model is definitely worth considering, where people pay a monthly subscription for access to the metaverse and not have advertising, not have the platform be tracking and then selling access to you. And so I think that's one model. There's other models where there's an economy that's enabled in the metaverse, and the platform provider is basically taxing that economy. And if that economy is about products and services and not about advertising, not about basically selling influence, selling persuasion, it becomes a safer metaverse world. And so there's a lot of ways to avoid an advertising-based business model, but I just think that people need to realize that when they think of advertising in the metaverse, they need to realize it's not going to be the type of advertising. It's going to be experiences. You're going to have experiences that appear around you on behalf of a paying advertiser, and you might not be able to tell the difference between this promotional experience, this virtual product placement, and just other real experiences in your environment, because the thing that virtual reality and augmented reality are good at is blurring the boundaries between things that are authentic and things that are put there on behalf of a potentially an advertiser.
Answer so far. So one more question on augmented metaverse before we jump on. So you've mentioned advertising, artificial agents are some of the things that we should look at. What do you think about hacking? So if you are living in an augmented metaverse and someone hacks your eyewear, what sort of danger do you think that poses in the future? We are talking about things in the future right now, because I feel like they could conjure a bus coming towards you for example. And if
Mhm.
that really isn't happening, I just felt that could be a problem. But what do you think for
Yeah.
the
So
future of areas?
no, absolutely. So far we've talked about just regulating corporations, regulating businesses that are operating legally. But then what happens when you talk about bad actors, talk about hackers, talk about fraudsters? And I think there's a lot of dangers there around hackers and fraudsters. And in fact, I think that the most dangerous uh, is around what we currently call identity theft. Identity theft in the metaverse will mean something different because um, if somebody can uh, hijack your avatar, they can pretend to be you. If or even if they don't hijack it, they just emulate it. They create a an avatar that looks just like you. We will have a situation where people will pretend to be your coworker as a form of corporate espionage. You'll see somebody in the metaverse. They look like your coworker. They sound like your coworker. They're emulating their voice. Those technologies already exist. In fact, Amazon just announced that they have that they're going to allow Alexa to simulate the voice of your dead grandparent. Well, that same technology will be used by identity thieves. You will see an avatar, it'll sound like your coworker, and you might be fooled into thinking that you're having an authentic conversation, and you might give up company secrets. The same thing might happen if somebody emulates and pretends to be a family member, and you give up a password. And so the phishing attacks and fraudulent attacks, identity theft, all those things will happen inside the metaverse, but will take on a new meaning because everybody is already hidden behind, will be hidden behind an avatar. Uh, and now you won't, how do you know you're actually talking to the person you think you're talking to? It's very dangerous. I know some of the large corporations are already looking at this, thinking, I know Microsoft, for example, is thinking about how do they protect against phishing attacks and identity theft in the metaverse. I think all large platforms should be thinking about it because the potential is very, very dangerous. We hear people talk all the time about digital twins. It'll be so great. You'll be able to create this digital twin. I like to say, well, what about your evil twin? I guess your evil twin will be somebody taking your persona and using it for fraudulent purposes, and it will happen. It will happen unless there's new levels of security, new levels of identification to really authenticate that an avatar is who you think it is.
I see. I see. Thank you very much, Luis. So, you once wrote this particular quote that I'm about to read. You said a hive mind is just nature's way of combining a group's diverse perspective with the aim of maximizing their collective wisdom. So, I want to ask you a question. Can you explain how seemingly mindless bees and ants come together to build beautiful structures like everyone can see and make excellent decisions that actually affect their society positively compared to humans with all our brilliance and all our consciousness? We cannot, I don't know, achieve that level of structure or beauty. We achieve beauty, we have our own beauty, but yeah,
Yeah.
just
So yeah, no. So my my current company, Unanimous AI, is really focused on this biological principle of swarm intelligence. And so swarm intelligence is the reason why uh, fish school and bees swarm and birds flock. They can function together as a superorganism that makes really good decisions. And it's fascinating because nobody's in charge, and yet as a system, they can make decisions that are significantly smarter than the individuals. And so, if you want to think of a swarm intelligence, think of a school of fish. A school of fish could have thousands of individuals. Each of those individuals has a slightly different view of the world. They see the world from a slightly different perspective. They have slightly different historical experiences, um, and there's no single fish that's in charge, and yet they work together as a system by detecting vibrations in the water around them. And so each fish has a slightly different input onto which way the school of fish should go, and they can sense each other through vibrations in the water. And it becomes this system, and the system is remarkable because it can navigate the entire ocean, and it can avoid predators, and it can find food, and it is functioning as this superorganism. And scientists have shown that it's smarter than the individual fish. Honeybees do the same thing. So honeybees are actually maybe the best studied example of a swarm intelligence. So honey, and I'll give you a really amazing example, which is every year honeybees need to find they outgrow their hive, and they need to find a new location for a new hive. And so and what they'll do is they'll send out hundreds of scout bees that'll go out into the world, and they'll search 30 square miles of area and find potential home sites. And a potential home site might be the hole in a log, the hole in the side of a building, a hole in the ground. They'll find these potential sites, and they'll bring that back to the colony. And now they need to pick, of all these potential sites they found, pick the best one to move into. Now, it sounds easy, but it's actually hard because the honeybees are very careful in how they pick a home site. They need to pick a home site that's large enough to store the honey that they need for the winter, that's actually ventilated well enough that it can stay cool in the summer, has to be insulated well enough to stay warm in the winter. It has to be near a good source of water. It has to be near good sources of pollen. It has to be protected from predators. So there's all these parameters. And so to be able to pick the best possible site from all these competing sites is really hard. A human would have a hard time doing that, weighing all these alternatives. And yet scientists have shown that honeybees, by forming a swarm intelligence, almost always pick the best possible site. And they actually do it by vibrating their bodies. Scientists call it a waggle dance because it looks like the bees are dancing. But really, they're vibrating their bodies, and they're generating signals that represent their support for the different home sites. So one bee might vibrate their body saying that they support this particular site that was found. Another bee would vibrate their body and say that they support this other. And they vibrate in real time, and they basically have this negotiation. It's like a tug of war. Like they're pushing and pulling, and certain signals rise and other signals fall until they converge on this one signal that they can best agree upon. And it's almost always the best signal. And so so this process of swarm intelligence amplifies their decision-making ability. And so my team at Unanimous AI, we've been studying that process of swarm intelligence for the last 8 years, and we allow humans to do the same thing online. So we allow groups of humans, groups of people anywhere in the world to come together and interact in real time, and we use AI to basically allow them to form this swarm and answer questions and make decisions and make predictions. And we found that it works, that when a group of people can interact this same way, they can make significantly more accurate forecasts, predictions, decisions, diagnoses, estimations, and it works.
With the help of Swarm AI. With the help of Swarm AI. So what parameters does the artificial swarm intelligence look for? Like, what does it take? How does it assist? I'm sorry, I've never participated in the experiment before, but I'm just thinking. So the swarm intelligence of bees, to an extent, at least we can track it back to the vibration and the synergy between them. So how does Swarm AI bring people together? Yeah. What does it look at? What sort of features does it look at? I'm sorry if this is going
No, absolutely. And so it's actually a very visual process. So it's a little bit hard to explain in words, but the when we have a piece of software called Swarm AI, and groups of people log in to Swarm, and then questions appear on their screen, and it's synchronous, meaning it happens to everybody at the same time. So it could be 100 people, they could be all around the world, they log into Swarm, and then a question will appear, and everyone will see that question at the same time, and a set of answers will appear, for everyone at the same time. And we then want people to make a decision. Now, humans can't waggle dance like bees, and so
Yes.
what we did was we created an interface where people use their mouse or a touch screen or their phone, and what they see on the screen is a little glass puck. It looks like almost like a Ouija board, like a little glass puck, and each person with their mouse or touch screen controls basically a little magnet, and so with their little magnet they can pull on this glass puck, and so they pull to try to pull the puck in the direction that they think that the group should answer, but other people are pulling in another direction, and so you could have 100 people all pulling in different directions, and so it's like this multi-directional tug of war, and so people are pushing and pulling until the swarm finds the path to the answer that they can best agree upon, and it's almost always the best answer, and so we you know we are basically using AI to watch how everybody's moving their magnets in real time to determine how the swarm should move. And we get these really remarkable results. And so we've partnered with a number of universities around the world to do studies to say, does this really work? And so, for example, we partnered with MIT to do a study where we had groups of financial traders, people who trade in the stock market. And they said, okay, come into Swarm, and every week in the Swarm platform, we'll ask you to predict the price of gold, the price of oil, and the price of the stock market, the S&P 500. And we say, we'll ask you to do this. First, just do it by yourself. We'll also ask you to do it by just taking a vote as a group. Or third, we'll ask you to do it as a swarm, as this real-time swarm. And when they work together as a real-time swarm, they were 26% more accurate in predicting the price of gold, price of oil, and the S&P 500 than if they were doing it in other ways. And we did the same thing with we did a study with Stanford University where we had groups of doctors make diagnoses. Same thing. And this was actually a relatively small group, just 4 or 5 doctors, and they were radiologists, and an X-ray would pop up on their screen, and the X-ray would say, what's the probability that this person has pneumonia? It's a chest X-ray. And we would ask them to just make the diagnosis themselves, or make the diagnosis as a vote, or as a swarm. And when they worked together as a swarm, they reduced their diagnostic errors. They had by over 30% when they worked together as a swarm. Wow. And so it works. And so we, so Unanimous AI has, we work with companies around the world who use Swarm to make financial predictions, to make marketing predictions. We actually, one of our customers is actually the United Nations. The United Nations uses Swarm to predict famines around the world. And so what they do is they have a group of experts who are experts on famines, and they might say, what's the probability that there's going to be a famine in a particular country? And they'll have experts on climate, experts on economy, expert on politics, and they could be in every continent in the world, and they'll log into Swarm and they'll make this prediction, and they found that it's faster and more accurate than the way that they were doing it before.
So I have to tell you truthfully that I'm blown away by the results. I've read a lot on different results that artificial swamp intelligence, swamp AI has gotten, and Unanimous AI has gotten. I want to say congratulations on those, and they are very, very impressive. So another question, do you envision that one day we might start employing the use of swamp AI at the highest level of government to help, let's say, politicians, lawmakers alike, to make smarter decisions around things like resources, political unrest, and stuff like that? So I'm not saying, I'm saying help them make decisions hand in hand. Do you envision that could happen one day?
So absolutely. So the using Swarm for decision making, especially among politicians, especially among basically government groups of all sizes, from a town council to a parliament to a Congress, I think would offer a lot of value, because what we found is that the swarming process is the most powerful when you have groups of people with diverse views, even conflicting views. Right now, if you have a group of people who have very conflicting views, um, they might be asked to take a vote or take a poll. And polling is used a lot. And what polling does is it shows you where groups disagree, right? What a poll is polarizing. It shows you disagreement. It doesn't give you any path to find agreement. Whereas nature's method of a swarm is really the opposite. What a swarm does is it highlights the places where people can agree, and it helps the group find the path to the answer that they can best agree upon. And we've done studies, we've done academic studies looking at polarized groups of people with very different political views, and have shown that they can, when they work together as a swarm, they can find solutions that they collectively better agree upon than if they pursued some other method of either just arguing about it or just taking a vote. Because it's because then this natural method works. And you could think about it from like an evolution perspective. If a swarm of bees or a school of fish couldn't agree on what to do, right? If you had one group of fish wanted to go in one direction and another group of fish wanted to go in another direction, and the school just split in half because they couldn't agree, or they were just stuck as they couldn't agree, that school of fish would have died out. And that's what happens in politics all the time. But so nature, through millions of years of evolution, found that this swarming process actually helps the groups find a solution. A school of fish never splits in two. A swarm of bees never splits in two. It never can't reach an answer. It can, and we humans can learn a lot from these natural systems.
So what I hear you say is politicians can actually use this sort of system. I think it is advisable to at least try new things. I think,
Yeah.
at least from the research, I would trust a swarm decision compared to a one man's decision. Yes, and at the end of the day, politics usually end at the hand of one man. But I think I might trust a swarm decision compared to a man's decision. So, on a large scale, how do you think swarm AI can be applied? So, when I say a large scale, if there's a way to implement it that society can make decisions together on larger decisions. So currently, if
Right.
US wants to go to war, I don't think everybody has a say in that, right? Just a few people. So is there a
Right.
way to implement this on a larger scale where society is able to make decisions together, or you think that's just too grandiose?
So, the swarm process can work on groups of all sizes. We've seen when we first started working, we thought we would need very, very large groups. It turns out that even groups as small as 4 or 5 people, like what we did with Stanford with doctors, works really well. We've worked with groups of 50 people, 100 people, many hundred people. The technology could work with thousands. We actually are working on technologies that could work with millions of people. And to do that, we're working on a technology we call hyper swarms, which are this swarms of swarms, where you take a huge population and you break it up into sub swarms, and they all overlap, and you can have these large groups, really large groups. And so it's definitely possible. Politically, there's a difference between having a group make a decision and having a group express its sentiment. And so even if we could allow the population to clearly express its sentiment, to inform politicians, so politicians really know what the population believes, what the population could agree upon, right? Right now, the way we try to find out what a population believes is we give them a poll, and that tells us what the population does not agree upon, right? But as a swarm, we could say, okay, here's what the population agrees upon. Here's how we can find common ground. Here's how we can find solutions that maximize everybody's, maximizes the collective interest of the group. And I think there's a lot of value there. So we as a company at Unanimous AI are pushing hard for larger and larger, being able to do large groups. We're working on systems that work entirely on your phone, so that you could have very large groups at least give input, express sentiment in ways that that we think would be helpful for political decisions, helpful for other decisions.
So I've taken so much of your time, Louis. So there are only two questions left. I'm so sorry.
Uh-huh.
I wished I
Yeah.
had you for 2 more hours. So, okay, one more out of the two. Would you say swarm decisions are better than traditional votes in all cases? If it is not all, then can you stay to one, if
Sure.
any? I just want
Yeah.
to, yeah,
So
yeah, please go.
so you asked a great question, which is better, a swarm or a vote? Is a swarm always better? And the answer is that it depends on the question. So if um, if we ask a question to a population, and if everybody knows the right answer, then there will be no difference between a swarm and a vote, right? And if 90% of the people know the right answer, there'll be no difference between a swarm and a vote. It's it's when it's or on the other side, if I ask a question to a group and everybody's guessing, 100% guessing, then again there'll be no difference between a swarm and a vote because nobody knows. But for that middle ground where you're trying to forecast something and everyone has some intuition, nobody knows the right answer, but everybody has some amount of intuition. We can amplify intelligence greatly, and so it's and those are really the questions that are important. The questions where nobody has any information or everybody knows the right answer. Usually, you don't even need to take a vote because it's obvious. It's the middle ground, and and where swarms work best is when you have groups of people who have different perspectives, different expertise, different backgrounds. That they all have different types of intuition. And what a swarm does is allows them to combine their knowledge and wisdom and insight and intuition in an optimized way and reach, the best prediction possible based on this combined knowledge, or the best decision possible based on this combined knowledge.
Mm, mm. Thank you very much. So the last question, like I said again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
So I guess the last question would be, what do you think? Where do you think would be in 2050? Give me your view or dream of the 2050 society influenced by the massive media.
Yeah. So 2050, that's a long ways out. I do think my my personal view is that the metaverse technologies that we've been talking about um, will be ubiquitous. I do believe that it will be augmented reality. I do believe by 2050 there will be augmented reality contact lenses. And people are often skeptical that contact lenses are possible, but they really are possible. There was just last week there was the first successful test of an on-eye augmented reality contact lens with batteries on the eye, with a wireless communication on the eye. It it's not going to happen tomorrow, but by 2050, I think people will have augmented reality contact lenses, and so information we will just expect information to be everywhere, right? There will be we won't think of information as something that's trapped on a screen, and in fact, we will look back at the 2020s when people walk down the street with their head down, staring down at a screen with their neck bent. We'll think that's silly because content is just supposed to be everywhere. Um, and so I think that will happen. Hopefully, it will be a highly regulated world with augmented reality, and the metaverse will be regulated and safe, and corporations won't be able to exploit consumers. Hopefully, there will be regulation of artificial intelligence technologies so that we could benefit from the power of artificial intelligence, but not have it be used to profile us and influence us and manipulate us. And by 2050, we'll start to have to think, will we be getting close to conscious AI? It's possible. It could have already happened. Either way, hopefully we will realize that it is potentially very dangerous before we allow it to happen and do it in a safe way. But right now, I don't believe we are taking it as seriously as we should.
Thank you very much for the beautiful answers, Lois. Thank you very much for coming on the show. I
Yeah, no,
really
it
loved.
was fun.
Thank you for teaching the audience and showing us, telling us a lot of things. Thank you very much for the great works that you did in augmented reality and the more than awesome work you are doing in AI and Metaverse currently. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lois. So before we go, let me